All right, provinces are laying out their plans to start loosening quarantine restrictions and maybe in a staggered way reopen the economy. Today, Quebec said elementary schools outside of Montreal will reopen as of May 11th and in Montreal as of May 18th. But high schools, cégeps, which is kind of like high school or college, and universities will close until August. Meantime, Ontario announced a three-step plan to stagger their opening, more of a framework. They attached no firm dates, just a series of benchmarks. Meanwhile, Porter Airlines announced that they're not flying until June 29th. So are some provinces opening too soon? What about some businesses? Do we need the federal government to step in and coordinate reopening plans, even though that's provincial jurisdiction? How can there be reopening before there's enough testings or vaccines? Let's find out. Joining us now is the Minister of Economic Development, Melanie Joly. She joins us from Montreal. Great to have you back on the program, Minister, and I hope you and your close loved ones are well. Quebec and Ontario, the two most populous provinces, have a plan. They're also the two hardest hit provinces. Is it too soon to have a plan to reopen?
Well, great to be back on the show, Evan. I think right now what we're trying to do is to make sure first and foremost that we keep Canadians' health and Canadians safe. And of course, we want to work with provinces. We've quite frankly never worked as much with provinces because Prime Minister and the Premiers are talking to each other every single week. And we want to make sure that while we are talking about reopening the economy, first and foremost, jurisdictions have enough testing to make sure that they can test, and also that they have access to personal protective equipment, PPE. And for the rest, they are in charge of their own jurisdictions. It is their obligations, I would say duty, to make sure they set out plans for their populations in their own provinces and territories.
Okay, let me just stop, Melanie Joly, Mr. Joly, let me just stop you there. I think that you mentioned something critical, and I want to know if there's a firm number. Provinces need enough testing before they can start reopening. Now, again, I'm not sure if the federal government can enforce anything. I think this is provincial jurisdiction. But in the federal government's view, what is, quote, enough testing? What is the minimum set of testing that your government would be happy with before a province can start reopening?
Well, what we've been doing as a government for sure is to make sure that we can work with provinces and territories to buy more personal protective equipment and testing kits. And we did that for the first time in decades by coordinating all the efforts and providing that leadership that was required to buy many of the equipment from China and other countries, and meanwhile developing our own capacity and making sure that we have.
I appreciate that. Sorry to interrupt, but I appreciate that everyone's working their butts off to get testing, but we just don't have enough. I mean, the bottom line is we're not even close to where we need to be. What is the minimum number of tests that we need, in your view, the government's view, to start reopening?
At the end of the day, this is a question that provinces need to be able to answer. But what we've been really working on is that there's sufficient capacity for provinces to test and that they have access to tests. And at the same time, you know, why reopening the economy and making sure that people have access to good jobs? Well, we've been doing all the work at the federal level, Evan, to make sure that the wage subsidy is in place. It started today, and bank deposits will be in banks' accounts on May 7th. We were there also for making sure that there's the CERB, so the $2,000 per month, so having a people-first approach, supporting people to make sure that they can really follow the guidelines and public health authority guidelines. So everything is in place with the rent relief as well, to make sure that as provinces are looking at reopening potentially the economy, well, you know, we can bounce back. And that's where we play a role as a federal government.
I agree, but the concern here, and I understand the Prime Minister talks about federal guidelines, but the two words that come to mind are confidence and confusion. Some might be confused by the patchwork of standards. Saskatchewan is going to open some, Quebec will open some, Ontario is waiting for others. Some will lose confidence They might say, hey, they're golfing in Saskatchewan. Why can't I golf in my province? What about Quebec? Are you concerned that people will both be confused by the patchwork and lose confidence in authorities to say stay home?
Well, I think this is a federation, and we've been working like that for more than 150 years. I think also that we can provide guidance. It is not a federal plan. It is a plan developed with premiers and the prime minister and all ministers being involved. But definitely, as provinces are going ahead, they have in mind the discussions that they're having with the federal government. And we very much know that the increase of COVID-19 cases is not the same all across the country. What is important is to make sure that the public health services and systems of these jurisdictions are able to cope with a fact that potentially there could be surges. And that's the main questions that politicians and leaders across this country are asking themselves. How can we make sure that this is not an increased risk? And this is why we're having conversations.
All right, so last question on that. I think you're making a very key point. If we see outbreaks and infections and province yet still continue to loosen quarantine restrictions, we see a second wave, is the federal government prepared then at that moment to step in? Would or can the federal government order provinces to enforce a lockdown measure if their plans are not working?
Well, we've been working collaboratively. A lot of people were pushing us to go ahead with the Emergency Measures Act. We thought that that was not required. It would be loaded for us to go ahead with that because we were having these conversations and the approach was working very well. Meanwhile, Canadians trusted us, trusted the federal government and their provincial jurisdictions while going ahead with that. The main issue, Evan, I would say to you is we need to make sure that we keep Canadians' trust. And while we do it, we can protect their health, reopen the economy bit by bit, and we'll be there to help as an ally to make sure that the economic crisis that is hitting also is really is not hurting Canadians too much, and that we can help them to pay rent, pay their mortgages, and put food on the table.
All right, I got to leave it there. There's lots going on, and the wage subsidy, people, at least 10,000 companies have applied already as of today.
As of noon.
Melanie Joly, Minister, thank you so much. Thank you so much.